Pilgrimage to Spanish America by Everett Gill, Jr., Chapter 7, Following the Silver Rivers. One of the mightiest river systems in South America is the Rio de la Plata, River of Silver, formed by the waters of the Paraguay, the Parana, and the Uruguay, which flow into the giant estuary between Argentina and Uruguay to be lost in the depths of the South Atlantic. Uruguay and Paraguay are named for the rivers which form their borders and drain the rolling lands. The story of these two countries is a study in vivid contrasts. Some will insist that the only resemblance is in the last syllable of their names, although they are geographically separated only by the 50-mile-wide Argentine province of Misiones, Uruguay, the Purple Land. So similar to the term Phoenician. Uruguay, a progressive country about the size of Oklahoma, is flanked by Argentina on the west and joins the southernmost borders of Brazil in the northeast. In the springtime, its rich plains are blanketed with wild purple flowers that have given it the descriptive name of Purple Land. Angry battles have swept across the rolling plains once inhabited by the Charrua Indians, long since driven from their hunting fields. Led by the indomitable General Jose Artigas, the armies of independence won the nation's freedom from Spain in 1825, but during the succeeding generation, the country was torn by tragic civil strife, culminating in the 10 Years' War, in which the capital city, Montevideo, was under almost continuous siege by the Argentine dictator Rosas. During this conflict, the noted soldier of fortune, Giuseppe Garibaldi, offered his services and organized the immortal Italian Legion of Montevideo. In latter years, he dedicated his energies to freeing Italy from the domination of the Papal States, France, and Australia, and became one of the heroes of freedom-loving Italians. Modern Uruguay began with the election of President Jose Batlle in 1903, a man of broad liberal sympathies who instituted far-reaching social reforms and led his nation to separate church and state, the first South American republic to take this brave step. Well, people always operate according to what they believe in office. And if they don't believe strong enough, they can be bought out, right? The 2 million citizens are among the most literate of South America. Since the Aboriginal Indians were destroyed or driven out, and Negro slavery never made much headway, Uruguay is probably the most completely European nation in the Western Hemisphere. Its people are friendly, democratic, and independent, but, unfortunately, rather indifferent to religion. Montevideo, the beautiful, from the port of Buenos Aires, the first-class steamers plow eastward through the waters of the Rio de la Plata to make the 150-mile all-night run to Montevideo. The low shoreline appears through the morning mists, dominated by the Caro, a small promontory that rises above the horizon. Tradition repeats the story that, on first sighting this land in 1519 of the Common Era, one of Magellan's lookouts cried in garbled Portuguese, Montevideo. I see a mountain. True or false, the name Montevideo has stuck. The German battleship Grufspee was forced into the Montevideo harbor by British naval guns after a wild chase through the South Atlantic during the early days of World War II, and here it was scuttled by its crew. Montevideo is another of South America's beautiful and modern cities, a great commercial center and tourist resort. The city's 800,000 inhabitants constitute 40% of the nation's population. The first Baptist missionaries to enter Montevideo were Reverend and Mrs. J.C. Quarles, who arrived in 1911. They were followed 2 years later by Reverend and Mrs. L.C. Quarles, who remained for 17 years, who laid the foundations of a difficult missionary undertaking based exclusively on evangelization and the establishing of New Testament churches. Well, all Christian churches are New Testament churches. For a number of years, Reverend and Mrs. B.W. Orick, who had arrived in 1921, served as their only missionaries. In 1939 to 1940, they were joined by Reverend and Mrs. S.L. Goldfinch and Reverend and Mrs. R.L. Carlisle, the self-supporting First Baptist Church of Montevideo, led by Pastor Ricardo Alvarez, meets in an inspiring sanctuary on a wall located property. In 1949, the Radio Norte Church, with missionary Orick as a pastor, dedicated a new and well-equipped building on one of the city's leading avenues. Again, the wisdom of assisting national groups in the erection of mission churches in important centers has been demonstrated. The attendance at the preaching service, writes Mr. Orick, has doubled since coming to our new building. And for the past 2 months, we have been holding daily prayer meetings among the homes of the members. The spiritual life of the church has greatly improved. For the burden of all these prayer meetings is to pray for a real revival in our church and in all Uruguay. For many years, Mr. Orick has led evangelistic tent meetings in widely scattered communities with encouraging results, and radio preaching in a land which guarantees full religious freedom has been used extensively. A Bible coach, equipped with a full supply of Bibles, religious literature, and a loudspeaker system, travels the far ends of the country, driven by Mr. Ismael Jimenez. Mr. Jimenez's vivid personal Christian experience has set his heart on fire to tell the story of redemption through every possible medium. The Uruguayan Baptist Convention was constituted in 1948 and is meaning more and more for the cooperative mission undertakings of the churches. The Women's Missionary Union has also been a vital factor in arousing interest in stewardship and missions. In distant China, a humble pastor was touched by a moving appeal that he had read in a mission journal concerning the need for the gospel in Uruguay. A few months later, missionary Orick received a small sum which represented 1/4 of the Chinese pastor's monthly income. It was presented to the minister of the Minas Church, who received it as a sacred trust and prayed with his church about its expenditure. Impressed by the devotion of this Chinese pastor, the young people and the women of the Minas Church supplemented the amount and opened a mission point in the town of Egua, about 100 miles northeast of Montevideo. Today, the flourishing group worshiping in this town of 5,000 people is a memorial to the sacrificial missionary spirit of a Chinese Christian Now, if you know updated figures and stuff, please comment them. The Uruguayan Pampa, one of Montevideo's most remarkable monuments, is the famed Carreta, the cart, in Battle Park, which portrays in bronze the life of the pioneers of the plains. Following the natural contour of the hill, 3 yoke of life-size oxen are seen, straining every nerve as they pull a high 2-wheeled cart covered with hides. Was at the illustration on the cover. A guacho, or cowboy, on horseback, and 2 more oxen complete the group, so lifelike that you can almost hear the shouts of the cowhand as he prods his team. As one drives at high speed on good highways across the rolling Uruguayan plains today, he often sees this same scene enacted in real life. From Montevideo, railroads and highways spread out to all points of the country, with one railroad line continuing to South Brazil. Out beyond the broad avenues and bright stucco homes of Montevideo stretch the hills and plains of the interior, and numberless rivers interlace the land like the veins of a giant maple leaf. From the railroads and highways, herds of cattle can be seen grazing in the distance, while flocks of sheep often scamper away at the roar of approaching trains. Uruguay's economy is largely based on stock raising, and the climate is so mild that shelters are seldom required for the cattle in wintertime. Flocks of ostriches look on disdainfully, while tiny pampa owls, perched on the fence posts, turn their heads about completely as one speeds by. At wayside stations, bearded old gauchos, their colorful, baggy trousers tucked into high boots, suck pensively at their mate tea gourds. No resident Baptist missionary served in Uruguay outside of Montevideo until 1941, when Reverend and Miss S.L. Goldfinch opened a new work in Salto, the city of oranges, located on the banks of the Uruguay in the northwestern portion of the country. This was new territory for Baptist activity, except for work started and later abandoned at Paysandú and a German-speaking church at Porvenir. The mission district served by the Goldfinches embraces 3 of the largest cities in Uruguay: Salto, Paysandú, and Artigas, and includes scores of towns and villages. In 1947, Reverend and Mrs. J.D. McMurray became missionaries for this western district after Mr. Goldfinch accepted the call of Paraguay. Since a church had already been organized in Salto, they chose for their headquarters Paysandú, known as the Queen of the North, about 80 miles downstream. This growing river metropolis of about 60,000 people, a rival of Salto, prides itself on its textile factories and creameries, its flour mills and tanneries. In 1949, the First Baptist Church of this city was organized. A special series of services for all prospective members was conducted for a full week by Reverend Z. Paul Freeman. Mr. McMurray relates, which proved to be a blessing to us all. On Saturday, with all pastors of the district participating, we heard the testimonies of the candidates for baptism, and on Sunday formally organized the new Baptist Church of Paysandú. We then proceeded to the banks of the beautiful Uruguay River, For the impressive ordinance baptism, which was witnessed by a great multitude, Reverend and Mrs. Ray E. Shelton, appointed in 1949, have joined the small staff of missionaries. But Uruguay, with separation of church and state and guarantees of religious freedom, plenty of countries don't have separation of church and state and do religious freedom better than the secular countries, but waits for more young men and women who will go in and possess the land. Mr. Askew of Parana has recorded the absorbing story of Don Pedro Telis, who as a boy of 13 went to work on a sheep ranch in the plains of Uruguay. 70 years ago, he found himself in the establishment of an English family and was impressed by the fact that the owners were not Roman Catholic, but held Sunday services in their home for the reading and explaining of the Bible. You know, the Catholics have their lectionary classes where they do that. As cowhands do, Pedro soon went his way to work from ranch to ranch, but never forgot hearing the Bible read. 70 years later, a seminary student, Raul Vives, reached the town of Belen, Uruguay, where Don Pedro was now living. The name of this town has the same meaning as Bethlehem, which actually is a term you can use for Virgo, the constellation. But here, the gospel was completely unknown. Except for 2 or 3 houses of brick and plaster, the whole community of about 1,000 people lived in grass huts. And there's a few Bethlehems, by the way, in Israel. Well, the country they now call Israel, but poverty, ignorance, and sin abounded. While visiting from house to house, the young student came to the little home of Don Pedro, now past 80. As soon as some words were spoken about the gospel, Don Pedro knew they were the same words he had heard 70 years before from the Bible. Memories came flooding back to help the picturesque old gaucho with flowing white beard to understand the plan of salvation. Now, some churches didn't have translations of the Bible, so if you didn't attend the classes, you didn't hear the translation. With a glad heart, he was born again and found a new peace through repentance and faith in the Lord Jesus Christ. Remember Matthew 7:21, it's not that you call him Lord, it's that you do the will of who sent him. So he was an avatar, Rasulullah, etc., etc. Today, Don Pedro is an active member of the little church that has been established in Belen. In the words of one who has visited the services, it is a thrilling experience to hear him quote John 3:16, which in Arabic contains the singular and definitive term for God, Allah. In his rich bass voice, and to meditate on what the gospel has wrought in his life. Paraguay, land of tragedy and glory. Asuncion, the capital of Paraguay, may be reached in a few hours by plane or in 4 days by a modern Argentine river steamer. For travelers who have only a few weeks to spend on the southern continent, this river journey is highly recommended. After leaving Buenos Aires, the steamer swings upstream in the Parana River and follows this artery of trade through the flat grain and cattle lands past Rosario and Parana to tie up 3 days later at the wharves of Corrientes, 500 air miles north of Buenos Aires. The traveler now transfers to a smaller steamer which follows the narrowing Paraguay River northward for another 200 miles to Asuncion, Traveling these broad river systems day after day, one can understand why the Indians called this the place of the great river. Paraguay's southeastern boundary is formed by the Parana River, while the Paraguay River cuts southward to divide the great country in two. Most of the million people live in the eastern portion, which is more fertile and provides a more healthful climate. A small portion of the population occupies the western half, which is largely dry plains, swamps, and river bottoms, and is known as the Chaco Boreal. The physical extent of the country approximates the combined areas of Missouri, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Along the banks of the Paraguay, the crumbling remains of churches tell the story of the Jesuit empire that once dominated this region. Some of these buildings were painstakingly carved from the quebracho tree, harder than mahogany, and appropriately named the Axebreaker. The followers of Ignatius Loyola, among them brilliant scholars and administrators, left Spain for the New World to organize their elaborate settlements or reductions in which thousands of Indian serfs were taught the catechism and instructed in agriculture and simple crafts. To their credit, it must be said that they protected these Guarani Indians from the attacks of slave hunters. And remember, in the Sunni and Shia narrations, those who fight wars to capture slaves are cursed by God. But they kept them as serfs in the settlements, and with the usual efficiency of Jesuitism, produced a highly developed ecclesiastical empire that was a model of autocracy. This religious state supported an army and navy and engaged in vast business enterprises from which the profits sometimes amounted to 900%. Because of their increasing wealth and political power, the Jesuits clashed continually with the Spanish crown, which ordered them all expelled in 1767 of the Common Era. The empire collapsed, the settlements disintegrated, the churches crumbled, and the Indians wandered back to their forests and to the paganism. They worked the land, basically. It's not a proper title for religion. It just means that land was divided into work plots, from which they had never been completely divorced. Achieving independence from Spain in 1811, Paraguay, like its neighbors, experienced terrible years of unrest. Schooled in political and ecclesiastical autocracy, the nation tried desperately to adjust itself to the unknown ways of democracy. The United States of America wasn't set up as a democracy, so I'm kind of suspicious when they talk about countries in the West as democracies, because you keep finding out they're republics. Paraguay later became a victim of one of the history's most tyrannical rulers, Francisco Solano Lopez, dubbed El Mariscal, the Marshal, like Franco, Mussolini, Hitler, and Stalin, and Winston Churchill. He reveled in the use of brute force and dreamed of becoming a second Napoleon. After a visit to France, he returned with an Irish mistress, Eliza Lynch, and a consuming passion to become dictator of the continent. Now, I mentioned somebody who said that, didn't believe in what we now hear, the numbers and all that stuff. Killed, had, actions that caused starvation and killed far more people. Now, I'm not sure about the numbers there, whether those are more, but Franco, I think there was less people killed. Mussolini less people. Ruling with a brutal hand from 1862 to 1870, he led Paraguay into the terrible Triple Alliance War against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. For 5 horrible years, the struggle continued, ranking among the bloodiest wars of history. No quarter was axed or given. Paraguayans fought with merciless savagery, seldom taking prisoners, driving his armies into battle. Lopez spent his leisure time in drunkenness and vice, or in the slow torture of those whom he had mistrusted, amongst them his mother and brothers. With the loss of tens of thousands of soldiers, he drafted little boys, aged men, and young women to fill the thinning ranks of his army. Fighting savagely in a hopeless cause, he fell back, leaving the land scorched and blackened. Ignominy came to him at last, as it does eventually to all dictators, when he died at the hands of a Brazilian corporal. The members of the Triple Alliance had suffered terrible casualties, but Paraguay's fate was infinitely worse. Some authorities estimate that out of a population of approximately 1,300,000, over 1 million died either in battle or from the wounds and disease, and that only 28,000 men and 106,000 women remained. In World War II, there was a lot of typhoid deaths. And people kind of forget that. They attribute the number to other reasons. Oh, and there were starvation deaths from railroads and all sorts of stuff being cut off by the bombings. And wars since World War II, we gotta consider that amongst the dead. Again, from 1929 until 1938, Paraguay's young men went forth to die in a useless war in the Gran Chaco. This vast area of plains and jungles has been disputed territory between Bolivia and Paraguay for generations. It is well named from the Indian Chucu, meaning hunting ground. Here, 100,000 men, Paraguayans and Bolivians, fought and died like animals. Well, humans are a type of animal, of course, often without equipment, medicine, or provisions. Asunción, heart of Paraguay. The red, white, and blue stripes of Paraguay's national emblem, floating above the custom house of Asunción, greet the visitor at the end of the long upriver journey. Founded in 1537, Asunción rolled in splendor over a vast empire, while Buenos Aires was a small seaport village supported by the illicit operations of smugglers. But the power and glory of the old colonial center has long since vanished, and Asunción struggles slowly toward economic and social recovery from the devastations of wars and revolutions. The city's palms and flowering trees speak of a tropical climate. Slow-moving ox carts and tiny burros, ridden by expressionless Indians, tell a story of poverty and helplessness for many. On the streets and in the marketplaces, Spanish and the Indian Guarani dialects are heard interchangeably, for Paraguay is definitely bilingual. In an attempt to strengthen the country's weakened economy, the government has encouraged immigration, and thousands of foreigners have settled in farming colonies. They raise tobacco, cotton, yerba mate, Paraguayan tea, and the hard quebracho trees, which supply tannin for the curing of leather. During World War II, the United States spent millions of dollars to assist Paraguay in its agricultural and health programs. The mission board of the River Plate Baptist Convention inaugurated Baptist work in Paraguay in 1920 when it appointed its first missionary, Reverend Maximino Fernandez. Mr. Fernandez was followed by Reverend Enrique Molina, Reverend Celestino Ermili, and Reverend Rogelio Berarda. These men and their families labored patiently through long and difficult years, realizing that this land needed a more comprehensive mission program. The River Plate Mission Board invited Southern Baptists to send missionaries to Paraguay. In 1945, Reverend and Mrs. S. L. Goldfinch, with years of experience as Southern Baptist missionaries in Uruguay, accepted the challenge and moved to Asuncion. The First Baptist Church of Asuncion now has an attractive building and is led by Reverend Francisco Macias, formerly of Mendoza. In another crowded district of the city is the Ciudad Nueva, New City Church, whose pastor, Reverend Ruiz Diaz Acampo, can preach as effectively in Guarani as in Spanish. This church holds the honor of having more tithers than members. To the east, beyond Asuncion, lie numbers of cities, towns, and villages yet to be reached with the gospel. To the west, across the river, in the Argentine Chaco, other opportunities are waiting. The churches in these districts have formed an association for mutual counsel and help. One of the churches on the Argentine side, composed of 200 Chaco Indians, is served by Pastor Enrique Bogado. As opportunities for missionary expansion unfold, the need for trained workers becomes greater. A small Bible institute in Asuncion will endeavor to meet this need. The Baptist Center includes a bookstore, library, and a reading room, and supply material to be used in visual education. Back of every plan and program, every budget or convention is the ever-present and compelling need of personal and church-wide evangelism. There are currents of revival running through our work in Paraguay, writes Mr. Goldfinch, enough to make us long for an outpouring of the Spirit's power. The terminus of Paraguay's main railroad line, about 250 miles southeast of Asuncion, is Encarnacion. This town faces across the Parana River toward Posadas in the Argentine province of Misiones. Large Russian and other Slavic colonies are situated on both sides of the river, and among them are a number of Baptist congregations which have already affiliated with the River Plate Baptist Convention on the same basis as the Spanish-speaking churches. Reverend and Mrs. W. E. Craighead, after serving as missionaries to Russian-speaking Bessarabia, now behind the Iron Curtain, for nearly 20 years accepted the call to serve with these Slavic groups on the Paraguayan-Argentine border. In Encarnacion, a fine Baptist center located on the main street from the port to the station serves effectively as a place of worship for the preaching of the gospel, and also provides a library and reading room, a kitchen and sleeping quarters, a 3-month Bible course for workers unable to attend the seminary will ensure better training of laymen and national ministers. On one of their mission tours, Miss Frances Roberts and Miss Miriam Willis visited Cacupe, home of the patron saint of Paraguay, about 40 miles from Asuncion. The roads were crowded with 40,000 people who had come from all over the republic to pay homage to the lifeless image, and the patio of the church was lined with beggars and with sick people brought there in the hope that they might be healed. Others were there to do penance. One lay beneath a sheet in the doorway of the church, so the pilgrims would step on her body. This suffering, she hoped, would atone for her sins. Well, suffering and hardship is not the same thing. Not far from the church is a sacred well, supposedly blessed by the Virgin, and purported to have miraculous healing qualities in its waters. Policemen had to keep order as the people rushed to fill the receptacles with the holy liquid. As in religious festivals throughout South America, alcohol flowed freely, and gambling devices were in constant use. This is the religious atmosphere in which our missionaries must labor. Well, the vice isn't the same thing as the religious atmosphere. An atmosphere that keeps millions of people from the simple personal faith in one who said, "They that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth." John 4:24. Health and sanitary conditions in Paraguay have been deplorable for generations, in spite of various government attempts to correct the major abuses and to provide hospital faculties. Paraguay has an infant mortality rate of 86 per 1,000 live births, while in Asuncion, about 36% of all deaths occur among children less than 10 years of age, and 19% are among infants less than a year old. For many years, the need of a Baptist medical program in Paraguay was discussed, but it was not until 1947 that any serious attempts were made to inaugurate one. In that year, Miss Miriam Willis, a trained nurse, arrived in Asuncion, followed later by Dr. and Mrs. Franklin T. Fowler, Southern Baptists, first medical missionaries to Paraguay, down in the poverty-stricken river bottoms of a district known as Chacarita. They started a small clinic. First, there was violent opposition and cautious interest, and finally enthusiastic acclaim. One patient refused treatment because someone had told her that the Yankees were there to take over Paraguay. As Dr. Fowler explains it, there are 3 barriers which must be hurdled before the people can be treated. The fact that the missionaries are Baptists or evangelicals, the religious barrier, the fact that there is a general prejudice against physicians since many prefer their herbs and witchcraft, the medical barrier. Well, isn't medicine derived from things of this world? And by witchcraft, what do they mean, right? Oh, it's not the same religion as me, so it's witchcraft. No, that's not how it works. I mean, if the term's used right. And the fact that missionaries are foreigners, are gringos, the racial or national barrier. But love and kindness have a way of winning in any language or race, and the selfless service of our medical workers is now being accepted and appreciated more and more. Well, if they're competing with the with prayer, ritual, and the base things of this world to treat things, medicine's sort of on top of that, right? Well, this channel we're not saying don't, it's not a medical opinion per se, you know what I mean? When Dr. Fowler, son of missionary parents, volunteered for service in South America, he knew that a real difficulty would be faced in securing permission for an American doctor to practice in Paraguay. To everyone's amazement, the Paraguayan Minister of Health granted this permission without requiring Dr. Fowler to take a long series of examinations. Well, every country really should probably do that for its medical people, but with the understanding that he would devote himself exclusively to the work of the hospital and would not compete with the Paraguayan physicians. This is what the Foreign Mission Board had been waiting and praying for, and funds from the cooperative program and the Christmas offering of Women's Missionary Union were immediately made available for the construction of a Baptist hospital. 3 city blocks at the edge of the city in Asuncion were purchased. The ground for the hospital was broken by Dr. Merrill D. Moore, Director of Promotion for the Executive Committee of the Southern Baptist Convention. When it is dedicated in 1951, the 50-bed hospital will be one of the best constructed and best equipped hospitals in all Paraguay, although American Northern Baptists have supported hospitals in Mexico and Central America for years. This is the first Baptist hospital ever established in South America. Several leading government authorities have paid cordial visits. Among them, the Minister of Public Health, the Minister of Education, and the Surgeon General of the Army. It is a great joy, says Dr. Fowler, to be able to tell these men that this is a contribution of Southern Baptist people and churches to Paraguay, and to let them see that the Lord's work is important. Miss Frances Roberts, who had served in Argentina and Paraguay since 1946, will assist in Dr. Fowler and the administration of the hospital. Now, doesn't the New Testament and the rest of the Bible recommend rituals and the natural things of this world? Of course, there is that surgery when people are 8 days, the 8th day of life, that Jesus said was of the Jews, rather than the natural order implied, basically. The A.R. Jones Memorial Chapel on the hospital grounds will serve as a constant reminder of the spiritual mission of the hospital. Because Jesus said to bathe and, put mud in your eye, or, that sort of thing. The same stuff they would call, if you have faith in herbs and witchcraft. Here, staff members, nurses, and convalescing patients may gather for meditation and prayer and listen to the story of redeeming love. The dream of many years has been realized as a hospital rises in the heart of a continent to render service in the name of the great physician. The people of this tragic land, so in need of physical and spiritual care, are as sheep without a shepherd. They need the touch of one who, looking upon the multitudes, was moved with compassion.